Hello and welcome to the Good Samaritan site. This site is a museum and also an archaeological site on the way between Jerusalem and the Jordan Valley. This site has been excavated, and what we see around us belongs to several periods. Mostly we see here medieval and Byzantine remains, especially this church where we're standing, which is a Byzantine church, commemorating the site of the story of the Good Samaritan. But what is this story? Well, in the Gospel, Jesus replies to a question that he's been asked with a parable, with a story. He says that someone went from Jerusalem to Jericho, and suddenly on the way he was attacked by robbers. They took everything he owned, including his clothes, wounded him, and left him at the side of the road to die. Slightly later, a priest came by. Now it's very interesting. A priest, because we already know that this road was also a road in which priests coming from Jericho went to Jerusalem and back. It makes sense that a priest would go by. So a priest comes, he looks at the wounded guy, and he simply turns his face and walks away. Then comes a Levite, a member of the tribe of Levi. He looks at the wounded man, and also he turns around and walks away until a Samaritan comes. And in a moment I'll explain to you what a Samaritan is. The Samaritan, unlike the priest and the Levite, the Samaritan stops, he takes care of the wounded person, he heals his wounds, and he takes him to an inn along the way. He also pays for the accommodation of the poor person. He did the righteous thing, unlike the priest and the Levite. What is the significance of this story? To understand that, we need to discuss a little bit the Samaritans and their origins. So who are the Samaritans? Well, as it happens so many times, it depends on who you ask. There's the Jewish answer and there's the Samaritan answer. According to Jewish tradition, which is recorded in the Bible, in the book of Kings, we hear about the end of the 8th century BC, around the year 720, the kingdom of Israel, which was in the north, the region that we now call Samaria, and its capital, the city of Samaria. Over there was the Israelite kingdom, its sister kingdom was Judah, and the Assyrians attacked in 720 BC and destroyed the kingdom of Israel. That's in the Bible. The Bible continues to say that the Assyrians exiled the people of the kingdom of Israel, the Jews who lived in the kingdom of Israel. They were exiled to the Assyrian territories. And instead, a new pagan population was transferred by the Assyrians from other places to the former kingdom of Israel. So now there's a new type of population in the north, and they are all pagans. Once they came to the territory of the kingdom of Israel, suddenly these pagans suffer from lion attacks. They don't know why it happens, but a local Jewish priest tells them that the reason is that they do not follow the laws of the God of Israel, and they are living in his territory. You must become Jewish, he says. So they decide to convert and they become Jews. Later, these people will be known as the Samaritans because they live in the region of Samaria. According to this Jewish story about the origins of the Samaritans, Samaritans are Jewish, yes, but they converted out of fear, not because they really believe in the God of Israel. They're not really good Jews. That's the Jewish story. Samaritans live till this day in the north, in the region of Shechem, in other places. If you ask the Samaritans what are their origins, they would tell you a different story. They would tell you that the biblical story is a false one. What really happened was that when the Assyrians exiled the people of the kingdom of Israel in 720 BC, in the end of the First Temple period, some Jews, some Israelites remained in the kingdom, in the region of Samaria. The rest were exiled. After the fall of Assyria and the fall of the next empire, Babylon, the Jews returned to their country, but they returned as different Jews. They were influenced by the Mesopotamian religions. So they do not keep the original form of Judaism. Who still keeps the original form of Judaism? It's the Samaritans. The real Jews are the Samaritans, those who remained in the land of Israel. So from the Samaritan perspective, they are the real Jews. From the Jewish rabbinical perspective, the Samaritans are false Jews, and the real Jews are those who remained here. It's very interesting because the Samaritans also say that their name, Samaritans, is twisted. It's not really their title. Don't think that we are called Samaritans because we are from Samaria. That's not the point, they say. The source of our title, Samaritans, is from the Hebrew root shomer, to keep. We are the guardians of Judaism, of true Judaism. We are the original Jews. Shomrim, guardians. So these are two different narratives. And obviously, when we hear that, it's obvious that we are witnessing sociological and ethnic and religious tension between two groups in this country at the end of the First Temple period and especially in the beginning of the Second Temple period. That tension builds up during the Second Temple period and creates deep hostility, hatred between Samaritans and Jews. Samaritans are the real Israelites, the real Jews, and the Jews are not, they say. The Jews say the opposite about the Samaritans. When Jesus lives here in the 1st century AD, he already lives in a world where this hostility exists. We have found remains, archaeological remains, of the presence of Samaritans in this country in antiquity. Not since their beginnings, but we do have synagogues belonging to Samaritans from antiquity, and we also found many tombs. In these tombs, sometimes we're lucky and we find these objects. Now, these objects are actually coffins. We call them sarcophagi. Sarcophagus in singular, sarcophagi in plural. You'd put the body of the deceased inside here, and you cover it with this stone lid. Now, amazingly enough, it looks exactly like Jewish sarcophagi at the same time, at the same period. But the decorations are different. So do the synagogues. They look very much like Jewish synagogues after the destruction of the Second Temple. Yet, if you know what to look for, certain types of decorations, you know I'm inside a Samaritan synagogue. However, sometimes it's quite difficult to show the difference between a Samaritan synagogue and a Jewish synagogue from the same period. It strengthens my feeling that Samaritans and Jews are very close one to each other. And as close as they are, so is the hatred. The hatred amongst brothers is always the strongest. So, does that have any effect on our understanding of the story of the Good Samaritan? Let's explore that. Now we understand who the Samaritans are. Let's go back to the story in the Gospel about the Good Samaritan. According to the story, the first person who meets the guy who was robbed is the priest. Then we hear about the Levite. The Levites are the members of the tribe of Levi. And then we hear about a Samaritan. Does that make sense? Some scholars feel that there's something odd in here. Why? Let me tell you something about Jewish society in the 1st century AD. There are different ways to divide the Jews into classes, into groups in the 1st century AD. One way is, for instance, to divide them into Pharisees and Sadducees and Essenes and Zealots. We find that in Josephus Flavius, for instance, the Jewish historian of the Great Revolt against the Romans in the 1st century AD. Another way of dividing the Jewish society into classes is actually found already in the Bible. At the top, we have the high classes, the priests. Then we have the Levites. That's a second group, a second class. They're also very important. They also work at the temple. They're responsible for the security in the temple. They're responsible for singing and playing the musical instruments in the temple and so on and so forth. So they also belong to the elite, leading the Jewish people. And then, after the priests and the Levites, we have the ordinary people, and they're called Israel, Israelites, or the Israelis. So the Israelis are the ordinary people, the lower classes, if you wish. Priests and Levites are the top. If this is the distinction, if these are the three classes, then in the story about the Good Samaritan, some scholars claim, we expect to have that same division. That is, first we hear about a priest, then a Levite, then an ordinary Israeli. But that's not the case. We hear about a priest, a Levite, but then immediately we move to a Samaritan. Why? Why Samaritan? From this point, different scholars take different interpretations to this question, to the different explanations. Some, for instance, claim that originally Jesus actually did use the tripartite division into priests, Levites, and Israelis, and he referred to an Israeli ordinary guy who tends the wounds of the man who was robbed. But they continue, when the New Testament was written, and now it addresses Gentiles, people who are not Jewish, who do not know what an Israeli means, someone decided to replace the term Israeli with the term Samaritan, which is better known. Especially when we think about the whereabouts of the Samaritans. Where do they live? They live in the region of Samaria, north of Jerusalem, which used to be once, in the first temple period, the kingdom of Israel. It's a very nice idea, but I don't like the idea of correcting the scriptures without a real necessity. It's very common in the academy. Whenever we meet a problem in the scriptures, we tend to fix it by changing words or introducing all sorts of different readings and so on and so forth. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not. But I believe, my method is different. I believe that unless you must do it, you don't do it. You try to look for a better explanation. And my explanation is very simple. Jesus wishes to accentuate to stress the difference between the behavior of the priests and Levites, the elite, and the third person who comes. If you mention an Israeli as the third person, it's fine. He's an ordinary person, fine. He doesn't belong to the elite. But if you put a Samaritan there, it's even better. The Samaritans, in the eyes of a Jew in the 1st century AD, are the lowest of lowest. They are the enemies of the Jews. There's hatred to the Samaritans, and the other way around, of course. And if such a person behaves morally, if such a person cares for the wounds of someone else, for his suffering, and the priests and Levites don't, now that sheds a new light about the priests and Levites. They are immoral. They behave non-ethically. Whilst that person, the hated enemy, he is a true human being. Now you see the black and white. You see the emphasis. And I believe that this would be the best explanation to explain the fact that Jesus does not use the term Israelis, and instead he uses the term Samaritan. Jesus himself, we know for a fact, according to the Gospels, he doesn't like the Samaritans. He is a Jew. The Samaritans are also his enemies. For instance, in John chapter 4, when Jesus meets with a Samaritan woman, he explicitly says, he refers to the Samaritans as dogs, not human beings. Yet, there are also other approaches to the Samaritan problem. We see that Jesus himself, on that same story, eventually is convinced in the pure intentions, in the morality of that woman, and he goes with her, and he stays with the Samaritans, and some of them even follow him. So there's a certain duality in the New Testament when we refer to the relations between Jesus and the Samaritans. Yes, they are the enemies, but at some point we see that Jesus refers to them as candidates to be true believers, to be saved. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're inside a reconstructed Byzantine church. The fact that we have a Byzantine church on that site is connected to the fact that in the Byzantine era, people identified this site as the site of the inn to which the Samaritan took the wounded man. But wait a second, did it really happen? Well, judging by the scriptures, of course it didn't. It's just a parable, it's a story that Jesus tells. We don't have any real basis to assume that this story really happened. It is a moral parable, that's it. I'm not surprised that in the Byzantine era, the early Christians believed that it happened, and it happened here. We see several examples of stories that have spiritual significance that are materialized and find themselves on earth as real places or real people. Think about, for instance, the story about Lazarus in the Gospel of Luke. Lazarus, the leper who died in Jerusalem. They would show you, back in the Middle Ages, they would show you the house of Lazarus. But he is just a figure from a story that Jesus tells his disciples, if I understand the Gospels correctly. So, if this is the case here, let's assume I'm correct, why did I bring you here? This could have been a lecture in class. But I brought you here for a reason. Let me show you why. Right here, at the entrance to the Good Samaritan site, we can see a cave. Now, this cave was excavated by professional archaeologists. It is part of a building. It's probably the foundation of the building here, and we can see perhaps a trough and some building materials over there, some stones and quarried bedrock. It is part of a large dwelling place from the Second Temple period. Now, it's not standing on its own. There's also a large reservoir from that time, and also other walls of other structures that stood here during the Second Temple period. Why is that interesting? Because we're in a very unique location here. The road from the Jordan Valley doesn't go continuously up in a steep way. It goes actually like that, going up, and then there's a little plateau, and then up again, and another plateau, and up again, and another plateau. We're here on one of these plateaus. So this would be, in my mind, a perfect place to build a dwelling or even an inn. Think about this place. It's in the desert. How do you make a living? What do you do here? Agriculture? Probably not. But you can supply people with food, drinks, and accommodation. So to me, it makes sense that this is indeed a place of an inn from the Second Temple period. If so, then I may suggest, perhaps, it's just a theory, just an hypothesis, that when Jesus gives the example about a man going from Jerusalem to Jericho, being robbed, and then he is taken by the Good Samaritan to an inn to be taken care of, maybe what Jesus had in mind was this place. Again, it's just an hypothesis, but I think it is a reasonable one.